Hi guys, Dave with the First Place Auto Parts, and today in the shop we're going to take a look at something that we all do, but we all may not do properly, and that is when we store our car for a long period of time, such as when we put it away for the winter time. Now for me, long-term storage has more to do with not only the time that the car is not going to be driven, but also the conditions it's going to be stored in. The car we're going to be working on today is going to be my 1956 Chevrolet, and while it may differ a little bit from what you're working on in your own garage, it essentially is a Chevrolet engine with 2 carburetors on it. It's got a fuel pump, steel gas tank, so everything I'm going to do here is going to probably apply to your American muscle car as well. The first step in preparing your car for the wintertime is to change your oil and your oil filter. Because of the nature of these cars, we typically don't drive them a long distance. They don't really get up to operating temperature for extended periods of time. And what happens is, through the combustion process, is there are acids and also condensation and water that will build up in the oil that we have to drain out. If we don't drain those things out of there and we let it sit over winter, not only can things start to rust, like the cylinder walls, but the acids can start to attack the bearings, such as the rod, the cam, and the crank bearings. So first thing we want to do is make sure we change the oil. The next step, and it's super easy to check, is not only to make sure that we have enough coolant in the radiator, but that we have the proper freeze protection. One of the things we'll use to check the level of freeze protection that our radiator or our car has is one of these simple hydrometers. You can pick these up at any auto parts store. They're very easy to use. You simply insert the tip into the radiator itself, draw out a little bit of fluid, and then what you're going to do is there's a number of balls in here. They're going to float, and when they float, on the side it'll show you, say for 2 balls that are floating, you have minus 25-degree freeze protection. So make sure that you not only check the level of your coolant level, but make sure that you have the proper freeze protection for where you live. If you're going to get down in the teens for an extended period of time in the wintertime at your place, make sure that you protect well below that. If you don't protect your car, what's going to happen is you're going to go to fire it up next spring and you're going to have water leaking from areas that you never anticipated. Things like broken engine blocks or cracked engine blocks are very common in the northern states because people don't properly prepare their car for winter storage. A broken or cracked engine block is not repairable, which will necessitate a complete engine change. So this little bit of safety and this little bit of maintenance is well worth it to make sure that you get it right. And then after checking all the coolant and also the oil level, we'll top off and check all the other levels, including our brake master cylinder, power steering, have an automatic transmission. We'll go ahead and check all those things and make sure they're all topped off and ready to go using the correct fluids. The next step is go ahead and release all the tension on all your belts. This would include the alternator, the power steering pump, and also the air conditioning unit if you have one. What this does is it helps keep the belt from taking a set where it goes around the pulley, but also takes the load off of all the bearings in each one of those components as well. Just remember to go ahead and tighten those up before you start it up again in the spring. Okay, the next step is something that many of you probably haven't done in the past, but it's something that's really good to do if you're going to let the car sit for over 3 months, especially if you live in a humid environment. What we're going to do is go ahead and take the spark plugs out of the car, and then we're going to squirt in some cylinder protection agent in the form of a lubricant. Some people will squirt oil. There's actually a product made specifically for this purpose. But we'll go ahead and remove the spark plugs from now, and then we'll give us access to actually squirt into the cylinder walls themselves some sort of a protectant that will keep them lubricated and keep them from rusting throughout the winter time. Okay, good. You've removed all the spark plugs now from all 8 cylinders. You've squirted fogging oil into each one of the cylinders itself. Now you need to distribute the fogging oil so that it evenly coats the cylinders themselves. There's one of 2 ways to do this. One is to grab a breaker bar with the appropriate size socket on the end of it, put it on the end of the crankshaft bolt, and gently rotate the engine over a couple of revolutions. The other and easier way to do this is to go ahead and remove the coil wire off the top of the coil and use the ignition and the starter to turn the motor over a couple of revolutions, thereby distributing the oil evenly over the cylinder wall. Another accepted method to fogging the engine and coating the cylinder walls is to take the fogging oil, take the air cleaner off your carburetor, and go ahead and squirt the actual fogging oil down into the vent trees of the carburetor. What you want to do is keep the RPMs up to about 2,000 RPMs to do this. You keep squirting this product into the carburetor until it stalls the engine out. At that point, the cylinder walls are completely coated. What I have found is that also it coats the spark plugs. And many times in the springtime, you'll either have foul spark plugs or you'll have to change them out anyways or clean them. So that's why I go ahead and squirt it straight into the cylinders and then rotate the engine over with the key. Next step is to go ahead and put the spark plugs back in. This is the perfect time to put new spark plugs back into the motor depending on how old they are and how they look. Go ahead and put the plugs in, your coil wire back on top of your coil, your spark plug leads back on top of your spark plugs, and essentially the engine, the oil, the coolant, the fogging oil, we're good there. Okay guys, only 2 more steps to go. It's been a good day in the shop, and the very next step is to drain the carburetors. Now you might ask, why do we have to drain the carburetors? Well, a lot of our fuel that's available today is ethanol based, and being ethanol based, it absorbs water from the air, much more than the old non-ethanol fuel did. When this water combines with fuel, what it does inside the carburetor float bowls, it starts to turn into a scale. It leaves behind a residue that it can easily plug not only jets, but air bleed screws and small carburetor passages. This is actually a secondary vacuum metering plate from a Holley carburetor, and what you can see are all the very small intricate passages that air and fuel have to go through, and this is just part of the carburetor, right? So if you leave fuel, ethanol-based fuel, untreated in your carburetor, and even treated in some cases, it'll create havoc that may require not only rebuilding the carburetor, but possibly replacement, depending on how badly packed up the carburetor becomes with that residue that's left over after the fuel evaporates. So let's go ahead and drain the carburetor and talk about the different type of carburetors and how to drain those the most effectively. The different type of carburetors essentially can be broken down between the two that have either the main sealing gasket is above the float bowls, or in the case of the Holley, the float bowls are bolted onto the end. So in carburetors such as these are Edelbrock's, Carter carburetors, and Quadrajet carburetors would fall into the same category. The easiest way to drain these float bowls, which are right on the sides of these carburetors, is to remove the carburetor, take the air cleaner off, and tip it upside down. When you do that, the fuel will come out of the vent screws and everything, all the vents. So fuel will just come out, make sure you don't have it over your foot. But go ahead and take these carburetors off, tip them upside down, work the accelerator pump to make sure that you get all of the fuel out of that chamber as well. This is your accelerator pump right here. You want to make sure that these things are completely dry. And then when you tip them back upside down or put them back on, you can actually hear the floats kind of clanging around inside their chamber. With Holley carburetors, they have the float bowl in the front. And what you can do with these, instead of taking them off and tipping them upside down, use the appropriate size socket, remove one of the lower attaching bolts for each one of the float bowls. There's a float bowl in the front, a float bowl in the back. Go ahead and remove this bolt, and at the same time on the car, remove the bolt, put a cap, a paint can lid or something underneath it, and the fuel will actually drain out of the hole, the mounting bolt hole. So this is a little bit easier way to drain the carburetor with a Holley than it is with the other, the spread bore, the square bore carburetors, the Edelbrocks and whatnot. So if you have a Holley, you've got a little bit shorter path. Still remember to work the accelerator pump to clean out the chamber below, because what will happen is the pump, the valve for the accelerator pump will hold fuel even after you drain the float bowl. So make sure when you're done, you go ahead and work the accelerator pump a little bit to get all the fuel out of that. I've seen these things lock up solid from ethanol fuel that's dried out in there. So just go ahead and make sure it's completely dry. And the last tip is to make sure that you stabilize your fuel. Before you put your car in the garage for the last time of the season, go ahead and take it for a drive. Warm the engine up so when you drain the oil, it's good and warm. But don't burn yourself. Make sure it's not too hot. But fill the gas tank up full of fuel and add a bottle of fuel stabilizer made specifically for ethanol fuel. There's many different brands out there. They'll tell you how to mix it versus how many gallons your gas tank holds so you get the right ratio. But then as you drive home, essentially that fuel stabilizer has an opportunity to mix with the fuel. It'll fill the fuel lines. Everything that you have fuel related wise, other than the carburetors, because we're going to go ahead and drain those, is going to be stabilized. So when you go to hit the ignition the next spring, that thing will fire up and run exactly as you remembered. Well, there you go, guys. So those are the steps to winterize your favorite ride for its long winter's nap. Do these steps and you should have no issues when you go to hit the key next spring to fire that rascal up. Follow First Place Auto Parts on YouTube and Facebook, where we will continually be adding new product review guides, how to install guides, and covering some really cool car guy events that I'm pretty sure you're going to want to see. Go to our always open, easy to use First Place Auto Parts website at fpautoparts.com, where you will literally find thousands of restoration and performance parts for your car or truck. Until next time, thanks for watching and keep the hammer down.